She stood in the middle of Bellamy's barn while 7 men looked her over and walked away. 7. One by one, they chose someone else, anyone else. And Vara counted every single rejection like a blade going between her ribs. The crowd did not laugh out loud. They were too polite for that. But she could hear it in the silence that followed each departure, in the careful way people avoided her eyes, in the way her own father could not lift his head from the bench where he sat with his medicine and his shame. Nobody wanted the orc. Nobody, until the barn doors cracked open against a wall of winter wind and a man covered in rock dust and dried blood walked straight toward her like the mountain itself had sent him. If this story moves you, drop your city in the comments below. Subscribe and stay until the end, because what happens next changed everything. The cold that settled over Gray Hollow in late November was not the kind that merely made a person uncomfortable. It was structural. It came through the walls and found the empty places in your chest and reminded you that it had been here before you arrived and would be here long after you were gone. Vara had learned to endure that cold the way she endured most things, silently, efficiently, without asking anyone for help. She stood at the cracked mirror above the wash basin in the back room of their cabin and tried to make herself presentable for the gathering. Her dress was clean. She had boiled it twice and pressed it with an iron heated on the stove, but it was 3 years old and the fabric had thinned at the elbows. Her dark hair, when she pinned it up, looked passable if you did not look closely. Her skin was green, the deep, even green of a full-blooded orc woman, and her face was all strong angles and sharp cheekbones, pronounced not from fine bone structure but from not quite eating enough for too long. She was 25 years old, orc, and in Gray Hollow, those 2 facts were a sentence that had already been carried out. Behind her, through the thin wall, she could hear her father coughing. Hagen had been coughing for 2 years, the deep, wet sound of lungs that were losing a war they had been fighting since the mine dust settled into them a decade ago. He had been a miner once, before the human operations pushed the orc workers out, before the coughing started, before the medicine got expensive and the pride got cheap. Vara, his voice was a rasp. You about ready? Almost. Don't take all night. She pressed her lips together and did not answer. There was nothing useful to say. She could have told him she had been ready for 40 minutes and had been waiting for his coughing to subside enough that he could walk to the barn without stopping twice. She could have told him she had already heard 3 women at the supply store whispering about whether anyone would offer for her this year, and the whispers had not been hopeful. She picked up her coat instead, mended at the collar, missing 1 button, and put it on. The gathering happened every year in the big barn at the edge of the settlement, the one that belonged to Horace Bellamy, who owned the general store and the feed depot and roughly half the debts in Gray Hollow. On paper, it was a harvest celebration. In practice, everyone knew what it was. A matching market. The border territory was still young enough and wild enough that unmarried women were scarce, and winters were brutal enough that men without partners did not survive them well. So every November, before the worst of the cold sealed the passes, unmarried men and unmarried women were presented to each other in Bellamy's barn while the community watched and quietly calculated. Matches were made, arrangements discussed, families formed. It was practical. The frontier had no room for sentiment. Vera understood all of this. She had understood it since she was 17 and watched her older sister get chosen by a grain farmer from the valley and ride away to a house with solid walls and a husband who did not cough blood. She had understood it every year since, standing in this barn, watching other women get chosen while she stood against the wall with an expression she held carefully level. This was her 8th gathering. She had never been chosen. Not once. Not even close. The barn was already full when she and Hagen arrived. Lanterns hung from the rafters, swaying in the drafts, throwing warm light across the faces below. A fiddle player was working through something fast in the corner. The smell of wood smoke and cider and too many bodies in a closed space pressed against Vara's face when she walked through the door. Her father moved toward the benches where the older men sat. Vara watched him go, slow, careful, his breathing audible even across the room. His voice was overshadowed. Their family rose to his death and found his face. Now I understood by a few tightened cans. wondering if it would be higher for the others than the mixed reveal of aliens. Vara Hagen, a woman's voice, bright and careful. Margaret, who ran the seamstress shop, was standing with two other human women, all of them watching Vara with expressions that were almost kind. Almost. Margaret. Cold night for it. It's always a cold night for it. The women exchanged a glance. Vara caught it and felt the familiar stone settle into her stomach. She excused herself and moved toward the edge of the room. The matching had its own choreography. Eligible women gathered near the center, visible, accessible, doing their best to look appealing without looking desperate. The men circulated, talked, assessed. If a man was interested, he approached. If the woman was willing, they talked. If the talking went well, a formal arrangement was discussed. The whole process was supposed to be dignified. Vera took up her position near the far wall, not hiding, not performing, and waited. The first man was Walter Lund. He was a farmer from the South Valley, thick-built, square-jawed, human. He approached her around the 8th bell with his hat in his hands and a prepared expression, the look of a man doing something he had already thought through. "Miss Vara," he said. "Mr. Lund, you're Hagen's daughter." The miner. "I am." He nodded slowly. "Your father's place, the cabin on Ridge Road. I heard he's had some trouble with the guild debts." Vera held her smile in place. "Everyone's had trouble this winter." Lund nodded again, looking past her left shoulder. "The thing is, I've got a good operation going. 200 acres, solid cabin. I'm looking for someone who can bring something to the arrangement. You understand." She understood perfectly. He was telling her that her father's debts made her a liability, that the cost of marrying an orc woman was already high enough without adding a sick father and guild loans to the calculation. "I understand completely," she said. "I'm sorry," Lund said. He had the grace to look like he meant it slightly. Then he put his hat back on and walked away. The second was a merchant named Alcott. He did not make it through a full conversation. He asked her name, heard it, registered the green skin he had somehow not fully processed from across the room, and his expression closed like a ledger. He wished her a good evening and moved on. The third was a stranger from the Northern Territories, a homesteader looking for a partner. He talked to her for nearly 20 minutes about soil quality and livestock, before he said quietly that he had heard some things about her family situation and needed someone who could bring land or resources. The fourth, Thomas, who owned the timber mill, walked over to Hagen, spoke for 3 minutes, looked across the room at Vara, and left without approaching her at all. The fifth was Bellamy's oldest son, Daniel, 20 years old, pock-faced, and even he took one look at Vara and found somewhere else to be. The sixth approached with visible reluctance, asked her age, said 25, in a tone that carried its own verdict, and excused himself. The seventh did not even pretend. He walked toward her, veered at the last moment toward the cider table, and she watched him go with the numb precision of a woman cataloging damage. 7 men, 7 refusals, 7 blades between the ribs, and the crowd counting along. She heard someone laugh, low, quickly smothered, from somewhere to her left. A small sound, someone finding entertainment in her humiliation. That was the thing that broke something in her. Not the rejections, she had built defenses against those, but that laugh, that small, barely contained sound of a person watching her stand here and be passed over again and finding it amusing. Vera straightened her back. She walked deliberately across the room toward the cider table. She was not going to stand against that wall and provide anyone with a show. She would get through the rest of this evening with whatever was left of her dignity, or she would stop breathing. Trying. She was reaching for the cider when the barn doors blew open. Not opened. Blew open. The doors slammed back against the barn walls with a sound like a hammer on an anvil, and the winter came through them like a living thing, a wall of cold air that made every candle shudder and set the lanterns swinging. In the doorway stood something that Vara's mind took a moment to categorize. He was enormous. That was the first thing, the sheer physical scale of him, the way he had to angle his shoulders to fit through the frame. He was covered in rock dust from hat to boot, coated in it like he had been inside a mountain, which was probably exactly where he had been. Over his left shoulder he carried a canvas sack that clinked with a dense metallic sound. In his right hand he held a second sack, heavier, the weight of it pulling his arm straight. His face was half hidden under the brim of a battered hat and the shadow of a beard that had grown past intention into territory. His coat was canvas and leather and had been repaired so many times, the original material was almost incidental. His boots left gray prints on Bellamy's clean barn floor. He stood in the doorway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. Vara recognized him before most people did. Not personally. She had never met him. But the stories traveled, the human miner who lived past the timberline, the man who worked a claim above the passes where nobody else would go, who came down twice a year to trade and never stayed longer than he had to, who had not spoken to most people in Grey Hollow in years. Torben. No family name that anyone used. Just Torben. He was 30, maybe 32. The mountains had carved his face into something that had nothing to do with age. Harder, more specific, like a tool that had been shaped by the thing it was used for. He had pale eyes, gray or green, hard to say in the lamplight, that moved around the room with the calm, systematic attention of a man who cataloged everything and trusted nothing. Torben. Horace Bellamy had found his voice. He moved forward with the practiced smile of a man who had accounts he wanted settled. We weren't expecting you until spring. Got down before the passes closed. Torben's voice was low, not loud, not performing, just a voice that said what it needed to say and stopped. Brought 40 pounds of raw ore and 12 pounds of refined silver. He set the heavier sack on the floor. The clinking sound repeated. The murmur that went through the crowd at the word silver was involuntary and immediate. The sound of people recalculating. Torben had already stopped looking at Bellamy. His eyes were moving across the crowd, across the clusters of eligible women near the center, the Marsh girl, the Delqua sisters, and his expression remained perfectly unmoved, like a man reading a list in a language he did not care about. Then his gaze reached Vera and stopped. She felt it as a physical thing, the weight of his attention landing on her from across the room. She did not look away. She was not going to do that. Not tonight. Not after 7 men had looked at her and decided she was not worth the trouble of a conversation. She looked back at him with the level attention she would have given anything large and unpredictable, assessing, not afraid, waiting to see what it would do. He picked up his sack of silver and walked toward her. The crowd parted for him the way water parts around a boulder, automatically, without deciding to. People stepped aside and did not quite look at him directly. He stopped 3 feet from her. This close, she could see that there was something dark on the shoulder of his coat that was not rock dust. It took her a moment to identify it as blood, old blood, dried to rust. "You're Hagen's daughter," he said. "Vara," she said. "Torben." He did not extend a hand. He was looking at her the way he had been looking from across the room, not evaluating her as property or equipment, but with something different, the way you look at a ridge you are thinking about crossing. Interested in what it could do. "I know who you are," she said. "You live past the timberline. You mine alone." "I do. What do you want, Torben?" Around them, the barn had gone silent. The fiddle had stopped. Bellamy was standing 15 feet away with an expression of intense commercial attention. Torben reached into his coat and set a small leather pouch on the table beside her. Dense, heavy clinking. "I'm looking for a partner," he said. "A what?" "For the mine, the mountain." He spoke like a man who had rehearsed this and was delivering it without decoration. "I've worked the claim alone for 6 years. That works in summer. Winter," he stopped. Not because he was emotional, but because the admission cost him something. "Winter is harder. I need someone who can hold the cabin while I work the deep galleries. Someone who can do what needs doing without explanation." "You need a hired hand," Vera said. "I'm not talking about a hired hand, flat, impatient with being misunderstood. I'm talking about a partner, someone with a stake, someone who stays." The word wife hung in the air between them, unspoken, and Vera felt the entire barn lean forward. She looked at this man, this enormous, dust-covered, blood-stained, reportedly half-savage human who had walked into a room full of younger, prettier, better-connected women, human women, and come directly to her. Who had not asked about her father's debts? Who had not flinched at her green skin? "Why me?" she said. He glanced down at her hands. She was holding the cider cup, and her hands were rough and scarred from years of cutting wood, patching walls, hauling water, doing everything around the cabin that her father could not. "You work," he said, "and you don't look at it like punishment. You look at it like something you chose." She was quiet for a moment. It was possibly the most accurate thing anyone had said about her in 8 years. "Half," she said. He blinked, first time she had seen him do that. "What?" "Half of whatever the mine produces. Ore, silver, whatever else. I'm not going up there as labor. If I'm a partner, I want a partner's share." The barn made a sound. Not quite a laugh, more like a collective inhale. An orc woman dictating terms to a man carrying 12 pounds of silver. Torben looked at her for a long moment. 40%, he said. Half, another pause, longer. Then his expression settled into something she could not immediately read. But that looked oddly like respect. "Half," he agreed. Vera set down her cider cup. She picked up the leather pouch. It was heavier than she had expected, significantly heavier. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow, before light." She nodded. She did not look at the people around her. She did not look for her father. She put the pouch in her coat pocket and felt its weight settle against her hip like an anchor. "I'll be ready," she said. She spent that night packing. There was not much to pack: a change of clothes, her mother's bone-handled knife, a blanket that was still good, her sewing kit. She was rolling everything into a tight bundle when Hagen appeared in the doorway of her room, lamp in hand. He looked older than his years in that light. Silver gray hair, face drawn from the coughing and the medicine. The body of a man who had once been strong enough to swing a pickaxe for 12 hours and was now strong enough to walk to the bench, outside, and back. "You're going then," he said. "Yes." "With the human." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment then. "Vara, don't." She said it the way you stop someone from stepping into something bad. Quick, firm. "Don't tell me it's not safe. Because you know what's not safe. Another winter in this cabin while your medicine runs out and the roof gets worse. Don't tell me you need me here, because we both know what that really means. And don't," she kept her voice level, "don't tell me humans are different from us. I already know that. I've been told that my whole life. I'm going anyway." Hagen's face changed. Not argument, acceptance. The slow, heavy acceptance of a man watching something leave that he did not have the strength to hold. "He's not a kind man," Hagen said. Not arguing, just saying it. "I don't need kind," Vara said. "I need real." He did not come in. He stood in the doorway a while longer, coughing once into his fist, and then he went back to his room. Vara finished packing in the dark, because she knew every inch of that cabin the way you know a place you have been stuck in for too long. She was waiting outside at the 4th bell when Torben came down the road with 2 horses and a loaded pack mule, moving through the dark and blowing snow like a shadow that had learned to navigate. He looked at her standing there, pack over her shoulder, coat buttoned to the throat, breath clouding in the cold, and gave a single nod. She took the reins of the horse he indicated, a broad-chested gray with a calm disposition, and pulled herself into the saddle. "How long is the ride?" she asked. 3 days if the weather holds." She looked north. The sky above the mountains was the gray-black of pre-dawn, heavy with cloud, the peaks invisible. From somewhere up there came the sound of wind moving through rock and ice at speeds that had nothing to do with the still air down here. "It won't hold," she said. Torben glanced at the sky, looked back at her. "No," he agreed. "It won't." He turned his horse north. Vara turned hers to follow, and Gray Hollow fell away behind them in the dark. She did not look back, not because she was not afraid, but because looking back felt like the kind of thing that would cost something she could not afford to spend. The cabin sat in a natural hollow halfway up a north-facing slope, tucked against a rock face that broke the worst of the west wind. It was larger than Vara had expected. 2 rooms, maybe 3. Heavy logs, dark with age and weatherproofing. The roof piled with snow but solid beneath it. A woodshed ran along the eastern wall, full to the ceiling with split logs. A small outbuilding stood 20 feet away, connected to the main cabin by a rope line she recognized immediately. Navigation for whiteout conditions. Behind the cabin, cut into the rock face itself, was the mine entrance. Timber-framed, wide enough for a cart, angled slightly downward into the mountain. The rock around it was gray-black, streaked with veins of lighter stone that Vara could not identify but that Torben clearly could, because he glanced at them the way a farmer glances at soil. Reading, assessing, filing. "It's good," Vara said. Torben glanced at her. "Most people say it looks like a grave. Most people don't know what they're looking at." He turned back to the cabin and said nothing. But something in the set of his jaw changed, loosened briefly, like a knot that had been tested and found one thread less tight. They unsaddled the horses in the outbuilding. Torben showed her the water barrel and the feed stores. They carried their packs to the cabin door, and he undid the heavy bar and pushed it open, and the smell of cold wood and iron and stone, and the specific mineral smell of a place built into a mountain rolled over them. Vara walked in. A stove, a table, 2 chairs shelving along every wall loaded with supplies, a narrow bed against the north wall, another door leading to a second room, tools hung on pegs, picks, hammers, chisels, a hand drill, things she recognized from her father's mining days, and things she did not recognize at all. "The second room is yours," Torben said from behind her, a little gruff. "I built a bunk before I came down. Should hold." She looked at him. He was standing in the doorway, big enough that his head cleared the top frame by only a few inches, looking at some point past her with the expression of a man waiting to see the full consequences of a decision he had already made. "Show me where you keep the stove fuel," she said, "and then show me the mine." The mine was everything. She understood that within the first hour. The cabin was shelter. The mine was purpose. Every piece of equipment, every supply calculation, every structural decision about the property orbited around that dark opening in the rock face, the way planets orbit a sun. Torben took her through it on the second morning. He lit a lantern and led her down the main gallery, the primary tunnel that ran 30 feet into the mountain before splitting into 3 branches. The air changed immediately inside, colder, wetter, carrying the specific weight of enclosed space and compressed stone. The walls were rough cut, the ceiling braced with timber at regular intervals, and everywhere she looked there were marks, pick marks, chisel marks, the evidence of years of solitary work carved into the stone. "Main gallery runs northeast," Torben said. His voice was different underground, flatter, absorbed by the rock, stripped of the resonance it had in open air. "The 3 branches follow the primary vein. North branch is the deepest, 60 feet in. That's where the silver concentrates." Vara ran her hand along the wall. The rock was cold and damp and textured in a way that told her things, how recently it had been worked, how stable the surrounding structure was, where the moisture was seeping through from above. "How do you shore up the deep sections?" she asked. "Timber framing every 8 feet, cross braces on the wider spans." He pointed at the ceiling. "I check every brace before I work a section. If the wood sounds wrong, hollow, or if the grain has split, I replace it before I swing a pick." "What does sounds wrong mean?" "Tap it with the hammer handle. Solid wood rings, compromised wood thuds." He demonstrated on the nearest brace, a clean, ringing knock that echoed down the gallery. "That one's good. Been there 4 years." Vera absorbed this. She asked 3 more questions about the bracing, then 4 about the ventilation, how air moved through the galleries, where the dead spots were, what happened when you went too deep and the air went bad. Torben answered, each one with the methodical precision of a man who had learned these things through experience rather than instruction, which meant his knowledge had been paid for at full price. By the 3rd morning, she was swinging a pick, not well. The technique was different from anything she had done before. The angle, the follow-through, the specific way you read the rock face for fracture lines before you struck. She hit wrong for the first hour, sending shocks up her arms, breaking stone in chunks that were too large or too small. Torben watched without comment, not correcting, not instructing, just watching. After the 2nd hour, he said, "You're fighting the rock." She stopped, sweat running down her neck despite the underground cold. "Don't try to break it," he said. "Find where it wants to break. Every rock face has a line, a natural fracture. Hit that line and it opens. Hit anywhere else and you're just making noise. She looked at the rock face. She looked at it the way she had learned to look at things on this mountain, not as an obstacle to overcome, but as a system to read. She found the fracture line. She hit it. The rock opened cleanly, splitting along the grain, and a section the size of her fist came away in one piece. Torben said nothing, but he nodded, and she had been here long enough to know that a nod from him was worth more than an hour of praise from anyone else. Her orc body was an advantage she had not anticipated. She was stronger than he was. Not in every way. His upper body had been built by 6 years of solitary miming, and his endurance on technical tasks was beyond anything she could match. But in raw lifting power, in the ability to move heavy stone and carry loaded carts through the galleries, she was simply, factually stronger. Orc musculature was denser than human. Orc lungs processed the thin, stale air of deep galleries more efficiently. And orc eyes, her eyes, adjusted to low light faster and more completely than his did. She discovered this last advantage on the 4th day when the lantern guttered in a draft and nearly went out. In the seconds of near darkness, Torben froze, blind, his hand going to the wall for orientation. Vara could still see, not clearly, not in color, but the shapes of the gallery were visible to her. The walls and the ceiling and the braces rendered in the gray-green monochrome of orc night vision. "Give me your hand," she said. "I can see the way out." He did not ask how. He gave her his hand and she led him back to the main gallery, where the lantern light from the entrance still reached. When they were back in full light, he looked at her with an expression that was pure recalculation. "You can see in the dark," he said, "not in full dark, but more than you can." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That changes things." "What things?" "Everything. If an orc woman, discovering that the thing that made her different is the thing that makes her valuable, just landed somewhere inside you, if you understand that the traits the world calls wrong are sometimes exactly right in the right context. Subscribe, like, tell us." He told her about Derek on a night in the 3rd week, when the wind was loading up outside and both of them were sitting at the table after dinner, he working on a broken pick handle, she sharpening the good chisel. "My brother built half this cabin," he said. Vara held the chisel still. She had learned not to respond too quickly to the things he said, because sometimes the important part was still coming. His name was Derek, 2 years younger. Another stroke on the pick handle. He'd have been 28 now. The past tense, would have been. "What happened?" she asked, voice level. Torben set the handle down and looked at the wall, at the dark, at the rock, at everything that was not her face. "Clean dispute. A man named Cragg, Silas Cragg from the valley, runs the freight operation and 2 trading posts. He wanted the North Ridge." His voice had gone flat. "The silver deposits he'd been trying to buy the claim for 3 years. Derek wouldn't sell." A pause. So Cragg found another way. Had friends in the territory office. Papers got filed. A claim backdated. "Our family had homesteaded this ridge for 15 years, and it didn't matter. Derek went down to the valley to fight it legally. Was there 3 weeks? He picked up the handle, did not work on it. Just held it. Never came back." Vera waited. "They said it was an accident. Ice on the trail, horse went down." He turned the wood over in his hands. "I've never believed it. Cragg's men were in the valley that same week, but I can't prove it. And going down there with a rifle instead of evidence would just get me hung and give him the ridge." He set the handle on the table, looked at the wall again. "So I stay up here, and I hold it, and I wait." 6 years, Vara said quietly. 6 years. She looked at this man across from her, this man who had seemed when she first saw him like someone who had chosen solitude. And she understood now that it was more specific than that. He was not a man who had chosen isolation. He was a man who had been driven to the only ground he could defend, and had been holding it ever since. "I'm sorry about your brother," she said. She did not dress it up. It did not need dressing. He nodded once, picked up the handle, went back to working. She found him watching her on a morning in the 5th week. She was in the north gallery working the face where the silver vein ran thickest. She had been at it for 2 hours, the rhythm of it fully established now, the reading of the fracture lines almost instinctive, the swing of the pick finding its natural arc. She was not aware of him until she stopped to check the wall and turned and found him standing at the gallery entrance with his arms folded, watching her. "How long have you been there?" she said. "About an hour." "An hour? You didn't hear me come in. I was working." "I know," he unfolded his arms. "That's what I was watching." Vara set the pick down. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, the underground silence, not empty, but dense, the compressed quiet of stone that had been holding itself together for 1,000,000 years. "Because in my life," he said, "I have never seen anyone work like that. Not fast. I've seen fast. Not strong. I've seen strong. But the way you read the wall, the way you find the line before you swing, you're not fighting the rock. You're listening to it." He paused. "My brother worked like that. Nobody else I've ever seen." Vera stood in the gallery with the pick at her feet and the lantern light on her face, and felt something she did not have an immediate word for. Not pride. Pride was too small. Not gratitude. Gratitude implied a debt. Something closer to recognition. The experience of being seen accurately by a person whose accuracy she trusted. "Go make food," she said. "I've got another hour in this face." He went. She heard his boots on the gallery floor receding toward the entrance. She picked up the pick and went back to the wall and worked until the lantern started dimming and the rhythm of the work carried everything else. The 7 men in the barn, the cabin on Ridge Road, the years of being invisible. Somewhere she did not need to examine right now. The storm came 6 days later and locked them inside for 2 days. On the second afternoon, sitting at the table with the wind screaming against the walls and both of them running out of equipment to repair, Torben said, "You can ask." Vara looked up from the chisel she was sharpening. "Ask what?" "The question you've been holding since the barn." She set the chisel down. "Why me?" she said. "And don't tell me it's because I work. There are plenty of strong women in that territory. You walked past all of them, including the human ones." He was whittling a replacement peg. He did not look up. "Everyone in that barn was performing something," he said. Prettiness, submission, availability. Every single one of them had arranged her face into whatever she thought men wanted to see. He tested the peg against the hole it was meant to fill. "You weren't performing anything. After 7 men walked away from you, 7, you were still standing there with the same expression you'd walked in with. No mask, no adjustment, just you." He looked up. The mountain doesn't care about performance. It cares about what's real. And you were the only real thing in that barn. The argument about the East Gallery happened the following week. Torben wanted to open a new section, a branch off the East Gallery where he had identified promising mineral deposits. He had been planning it before Vara arrived, and he presented it the way he presented most things, as a decision already made, requiring only execution. Vara went and looked at the section. She stood at the entrance for 10 minutes, looking at the walls, the ceiling, the bracing. She tapped 3 of the support timbers with the hammer handle. 2 rang clean. 1 thudded, hollow, compromised, the grain splitting from years of moisture. She came back to the cabin. "No," she said. Torben looked up from the map he was marking. "No? The east branch isn't safe. The 3rd brace is compromised and the wall above it is seeping. If you open that section and put stress on the surrounding rock, you risk a collapse that takes out the East Gallery entirely. I've worked unstable sections before. You've worked them alone. Now there are 2 of us, and I'm telling you that section stays closed until we replace the compromised bracing and address the water seep." His jaw tightened. She watched him process the resistance, a man who had made every decision alone for 6 years, encountering for the first time a partner who would not simply execute his plans. "I know this mine," he said. "You know it alone. I'm here now. That changes the calculation." He looked at her across the table. She met his gaze and held it. Not confrontational, steady. The steady gaze of a person who had examined the evidence and arrived at a conclusion and was not going to be moved by authority or habit. The silence between them was not empty. It was the loaded quiet of 2 people testing whether their partnership could survive disagreement. "The brace," he said. "You're sure? Tap it yourself." He went. He tapped it. He came back. We'll replace the bracing first, he said. Then reassess. Thank you. Don't thank me. You were right. They found the old markings 3 days later, during the bracing replacement in the East Gallery. Vera was pulling the compromised timber out, using her full orc strength to wrench the split beam from its housing, when the wall behind it came away in a section, revealing a pocket of older stone that had been sealed behind the brace for decades. The stone was marked, not pick marks, not the random evidence of mining. These were deliberate. Carved symbols, shallow but precise, running in a line along the exposed wall. Vara brought the lantern close and looked at them, and her breath stopped. She knew these symbols. She had seen them once before, on the blade of her mother's bone-handled knife. The same angular script, the same deliberate spacing. Orc mining marks, 200 years old at minimum. Torben, she said. Come look at this. He came. He looked. He did not recognize what he was seeing because he had never had reason to learn orc script. What is it? He said. This mine was worked before, Vara said. Her voice was strange in her own ears, thick with something she was not yet ready to name. 200 years ago, by orc miners, my people. She ran her fingers along the carved symbols. They read, Deep Stone Clan, 3rd Gallery, the mountain provides. Your people mined here, Torben said, before humans came to this territory, before the settlements, before the claim system, before any of it. The orc clans were here first. They worked these mountains. She looked at him in the lantern light. This mine was theirs, ours. They left, or were pushed out, and the mountain sat empty until you came and opened it again. Torben looked at the markings. He looked at the markings again. You're saying I've been working a mine that belonged to your people, he said. I'm saying we've been working a mine that belonged to my people. She kept her voice level. And now I'm here. And maybe that's not an accident. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, The name on the claim, when we register the partnership at the territory office, what name do you want on it? Mine, she said. Both of ours, but mine first. He nodded, once, the way he nodded when a thing was settled and did not need further discussion. They sealed the pocket back up, but Vara kept the knowledge. She carried it the way she carried everything worth carrying. Carefully, precisely, with the understanding that some things are heavier than stone and more valuable than silver. The collapse happened on a Thursday in late January. They were both in the North Gallery, the deepest section 60 feet into the mountain, where the silver vein ran thickest. Torben was working the face while Vara hauled loaded carts back to the main gallery. She was 20 feet behind him, pushing a full cart, when the sound came. Not a crack, not a bang, a groan, low, structural, the sound of rock deciding to be somewhere else. The ceiling above the gallery entrance shifted, and then it came down. Not the whole ceiling, a section, maybe 15 feet of it, dropping in a cascade of stone and timber and dust that filled the gallery entrance from floor to roof in a matter of seconds. The noise was beyond anything Vara had experienced. Percussive, physical, a wall of sound that hit her chest and pushed her backward against the cart. Then silence. Not the absence of sound, the presence of a new kind of silence. The dense, compressed quiet of two people sealed inside a mountain. Dust hung in the air. The lantern was still burning. She could see that, the small flame throwing its circle of light across walls that were suddenly terrifyingly close. Behind her, she could hear Torben moving, the scrape of his boots on stone. Vara, I'm here. Hurt? No, she heard him come closer through the dust. His lantern appeared, a second circle of light meeting hers, and in the combined glow she could see his face. Calm. Not the performed calm of a man pretending, the genuine calm of a man who had been inside a mountain long enough to know which situations allowed panic and which did not. This one did not. The entrance is blocked, he said. Flat. Informational. 15 feet of fall. Minimum. Timber's gone. The braces gave way. How much air do we have? He looked at the gallery dimensions, did the calculations she could see happening behind his eyes. At this depth, with this volume, 3 days. Maybe 4 if we stay still. We're not staying still, Vara said. We're digging out. They dug, taking turns. 2 hours on, 1 hour resting, alternating through the first day and into what they estimated was the second, though time underground without daylight became approximate quickly. The work was brutal. The collapse had compressed the debris into a mass that did not want to move. Every stone they pried loose required careful assessment. Pull the wrong piece and the pile shifted, settled, potentially sealed them in more completely than before. Vera's orc strength was the difference. She could move stones that Torben could not budge, could brace a timber with her body while he cleared the space behind it. And when the air started getting thin, a gradual change, not sudden, the slow tightening of each breath that told them the clock was running. Her orc lungs processed what remained more efficiently than his. She noticed it on the second day. Torben's breathing was labored, his movements slower, his face gray. She was tired but functional. "You need to rest," she said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Your lungs aren't built for this air. Mine are. Rest. I'll dig." He looked at her. She could see him fighting it. A man who had done everything alone for 6 years, confronting the reality that in this moment, he was dependent on someone else. Not because she was better, because her body was built for conditions his was not. He sat against the gallery wall. He watched her dig, and she dug, for 4 hours without stopping, moving stone that should have required 2 people, her orc muscles doing what they were designed to do in an environment her ancestors had evolved in. On the third day, she broke through. A small opening, fist-sized, then head-sized, then wide enough to crawl through. Cold air rushed in from the main gallery beyond, and the quality of it, fresh, mineral-sharp, carrying the temperature of the outside world, was the most profound physical sensation Vara had ever experienced. She breathed it in until her chest ached. "Come through," she said. "Slowly, the edges aren't stable." Torben crawled through the opening she had made. They sat on the other side in the main gallery, breathing clean air, saying nothing. 3 days in the dark, 3 days of alternating exhaustion, 3 days of absolute, mutual dependency, each of them alive because the other was there. "You dug us out," Torben said. "We dug us out," Vara corrected. "You held the braces while I cleared." He shook his head slowly. "That last 4 hours was you, only you. I couldn't have moved those stones if I'd had another day to try." She looked at her arms, covered in rock dust, scraped raw in places, bruised from shoulder to wrist. She looked at his face, gray, exhausted, the face of a man who had been brought to the edge of his capability and was honest enough to admit it. "Next time," she said, "we reinforce the north gallery ceiling before we work the face." "Agreed," he said. They sat in the main gallery and breathed. Neither of them needed to say what had changed. It was structural, the kind of change that happens to a building when you replace its foundation. Everything above it looks the same, but the weight is distributed differently. The load is shared. If 2 people sealed in a mountain, breathing each other's air, digging toward daylight with nothing but their own bodies, if that image of absolute mutual need just reached something inside you, subscribe, like, tell us. Torben went to the valley in February. He needed to purchase blasting powder for the spring work, arrange the ore assay with a trader who only operated from the valley settlement, and check on his claim filings at the territory office. 2 weeks minimum. "I can go alone," he said, "if you don't want to stay." "I'm staying," Vera said. He looked at her. She looked back. "The mine doesn't stop because you're in the valley," she said. "The horses need feeding. The galleries need checking. The cabin needs heat. I'll manage." He left at dawn on a Tuesday. Vara stood at the cabin door and watched him ride south until the trail took him below the tree line and he vanished. And then she turned around and went to work. The storm came on the third day. Not a normal storm. This one had a quality of intention to it, a deep, structural assault that came from the northwest and sat on the mountain like something that had decided to stay. Wind speeds that made the cabin walls vibrate. Snow so thick and driven that stepping outside meant losing sight of the door within 10 feet. Temperature drops that put ice on the inside of the water barrel in 2 hours. Vara managed it alone. She kept the stove running through a fuel consumption that would have alarmed her if she had allowed herself to calculate it. She broke the ice on the water barrel 3 times a day. She fed the horses in the outbuilding, navigating by the rope line with her hand frozen to the guide, her orc eyes picking out the outbuilding shape in the white outbuilding shape, in the white out where human eyes would have seen nothing. She checked the mine entrance every morning to ensure the snow load had not compromised the timber framing. She shored up one section of the woodshed roof that was groaning under accumulated weight. She repaired a split in the cabin wall where the wind had found a gap in the chinking, working with cold, stiffened hands and a determination that was not brave and was not stubborn, and was simply the mechanical refusal to stop doing what needed doing. The storm lasted 9 days. 9 days alone on a mountain in conditions that would have killed most people she had ever known. 9 days of waking before dawn in a cabin that was cold because the stove had burned down overnight, and lighting the stove, and breaking the ice, and feeding the horses, and checking the mine, and eating, and sleeping and doing it again. By the 9th day, when the wind finally dropped, and the sky went from gray to the hard, bright blue that came after a storm had spent itself, Vara stood outside the cabin in the new snow and looked at the mountain and felt something she had never felt before. Not triumph, not pride. Something deeper and less dramatic. The specific, permanent knowledge of what she was capable of when every external support was removed and there was nothing between her and the mountain except herself. She knew now. She knew in her body and her bones and the muscles that ached from 9 days of solitary labor. She could do this alone. She could hold this mountain and this mine and this life without anyone else. She did not want to. That was the revelation. Not that she could manage alone. She had always suspected that, but that the ability to manage alone made the choice to not be alone a choice rather than a necessity. And choices freely made were worth more than necessities endured. Torben returned on the 12th day. He rode up the trail with the pack mule loaded and his face set against the wind, and he found the cabin heated, the horses fed, the mine entrance clear, the woodshed repaired, and Vara sitting at the table, sharpening the good chisel, as if nothing had happened. He stood in the doorway and looked at the cabin, at every evidence of 9 days of solitary management, and she watched him do the arithmetic. Storm hit on the 3rd day, she said. Lasted 9. I know, I was stuck in the valley for a week waiting for the pass to clear. He set his pack down. I tried to come back twice. The trail was closed. I managed. I can see that. He stood in the middle of the cabin and looked at her, and his expression was something she filled carefully. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask, can you do this without me? Vara looked at him steadily. Yes. Do you want to? No, he nodded. The specific nod of a man receiving an answer he had hoped for but had not been certain of, and finding that the uncertainty had been the hardest part. Good, he said. Neither do I. Crag came in March, when the thaw was starting and the south trail was passable again. He arrived with 4 men on horseback, well armed, carrying survey equipment and the specific posture of people who had been told this was going to be easy. The man in front was not Crag himself, a hired leader. Competent-looking, professional. Vara saw them from the mine entrance, where she had been checking the morning's work. She walked to the cabin, set her pick against the wall, and picked up the rifle. South Trail, she told Torben. 5 riders, survey tools. Crag's men. Torben was at the cabin's south window in seconds. He looked. He counted. His face went through the rapid, controlled shift of a man moving from civilian to defensive. He thinks I'm still hurt from the collapse, Torben said. Or he heard I went to the valley and thinks I haven't been back long enough to prepare. He's wrong about both, Vara said. She had spent the week after the storm, the week between the storm breaking and Torben's return, doing something she had not told him about. She had walked the approaches to the cabin and the mine from every direction. She had identified the narrow points, the blind spots, the places where the terrain naturally compressed movement into channels that could be blocked or defended. And she had prepared the south trail had a switchback where the path narrowed between 2 rock faces, wide enough for single-file horses, narrow enough that a fallen tree across it would stop all forward movement. She had positioned that tree, cut it 3/4 through, and left it standing, a kick away from blocking the trail completely. The east approach, the draw that ran behind the mine entrance, had an unstable snow shelf above it that she had undermined by clearing the anchoring brush. Significant weight on the trail below would bring it down. She had done this alone, during the storm and after it. without instruction, without permission, without telling anyone. The switchback, she told Torben. I've got a tree ready to drop. It'll block the south trail for horses. He looked at her. The east draw has an unstable shelf. If they try to flank through it, the trail buries itself. He continued looking at her. I did it during the storm, she said. I had time. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, show me the positions. She showed him. He assessed each one with the eye of a man who had been defending this ridge for 6 years and was now looking at defenses he had not built and finding them sound. The switchback tree, he said, when they reach it, you drop it from above. I'll be on the rock face. 1 kick to the cut. And the east draw, we don't touch it unless they try to go around. If they do, I fire above the shelf. The shot brings it down. Torben looked at her, looked at the positions, looked at her again. You did all of this alone, he said. You were in the valley. The mountain didn't stop being dangerous because you weren't here. The riders reached the switchback 40 minutes later. Vara was on the rock face above, prone, the rifle beside her. Torben was at the cabin window. They waited. The lead rider came around the switchback. Vera kicked the cut tree. It went down across the trail with a crack that echoed off both rock faces, and the first horse screamed and reared, and the riders behind him piled up in the narrow space. Torben fired from the cabin into the rock above the trail, not at the men, a warning shot that sent stone fragments showering down on the blocked riders. The mine is defended, Vara called down from the rock face, her voice carried clearly in the cold air. The south trail is blocked and the east approach is worse. Turn around. The lead rider looked up. He could not see her clearly. She was behind the rock lip, only the rifle barrel visible. But he could hear her, and what he heard was not a person bluffing. He turned his horse. They went back down the trail. Vara stayed on the rock face for another hour, watching, making sure they did not circle back. Then she climbed down and walked to the cabin, and Torben was in the doorway, and his expression was the expression of a man who had just watched something he was still processing. He'll come back, Vara said, with more men and Crag himself. I know, Torben said. Then we'll be ready. She walked past him into the cabin and set the rifle on the table and sat down and started sharpening the chisel. Because the chisel needed sharpening, and because tomorrow morning the mine still needed working, and the mountain did not care about anything that had just happened on its surface. Torben stood in the doorway a moment longer. Then he came inside and closed the door and sat across from her and did not say anything for a long time, which was how they said the things that mattered most. Crag came back 18 days later. Vera had known he would. She had said so, and she had spent those 18 days accordingly. He came with 9 men this time, 7 riders and 2 on foot carrying survey equipment. The same configuration as before, but doubled. The man on the lead horse was not the hired professional from the first visit. It was Crag himself, medium height, compact, wearing a coat that was too clean for the mountain, sitting his horse with the administrative posture of a man reviewing property he had already decided to acquire. Vara counted them from the west approach, 9 plus Crag. 2 of them carrying equipment that was not weapons but was not innocent either. Survey tools, claim markers, the instruments of a man who planned to plant a flag and file paperwork. He brought his documentation team, she told Torben. He's not just trying to take the mine. He's trying to register a presence. If his survey men reach the ridge and take samples, he can file a contested claim at the territory office. Then they don't reach the ridge, Torben said. They split. Torben took the cabin window, the position that covered the south trail approach. Vera took the ridge above the mine entrance, the position that covered the slope the survey men would need to climb. The riders hit the blocked switchback and found the tree she had replaced, a fresh one, heavier with deadfall piled behind it. The trail was impassable for horses. 3 riders dismounted and began clearing, while the others spread out looking for alternate routes. 2 of them moved toward the east draw. Vera fired from the ridge, not at the men, at the snow shelf above the draw. The shot cracked across the mountain face, and the shelf let go, not an avalanche, but a heavy, deliberate slide that poured across the draw trail and sealed it under 4 feet of compacted snow. The men in the draw scrambled backward. From the cabin, Torben's rifle spoke, One shot into the rock above the switchback, showering the clearing crew with stone chips. They dropped their tools and pressed against the rock face. Silas Cragg, Torben's voice carried down the trail. A pause. Then Cragg's voice came up through the cold. Controlled, measured, the voice of a man managing a situation he had expected to be easier. Torben, I heard you'd had some trouble. Came to discuss the claim situation. The claim situation is settled. Has been for 15 years. The Territory Office has some concerns about the documentation. The Territory Office has your money. That's what it has. Torben's voice was flat. You want this ridge, Cragg. You've wanted it since you killed my brother for it. And you're not getting it. The word killed dropped into the cold air and sat there. Vera watched the surveymen. They had stopped at the base of the slope when the draw sealed. Now they were looking up toward the ridge, toward her position, calculating whether they could make the climb under rifle fire. I wouldn't, Vera called down. Her voice was clear, carrying the specific steady quality of a person who had done the math and was satisfied with the result. You've got 2 blocked trails, 1 sealed draw, and 2 rifles with clear sight lines. The third route is the north face, which is impassable in any season. You're out of approaches. Craig's horse shifted. She could not see his face clearly at this distance, but she could read his posture, the stiffening of a man recalculating. Who is that? He said. My partner, Torben said. Another silence. Longer. Varro watched Cragg absorb the word partner and watched it fail to produce the meaning he was expecting. You've got 5 minutes to clear the south trail heading down, Varra said. That trail stays open because I'm leaving it open. That changes if you're still here when I finish counting. Cragg sat his horse for a long moment. Then he turned to his men and said something she could not hear. The survey men picked up their equipment. The riders who had dismounted remounted. They went back down the south trail in single file. Varra watched them until they disappeared below the tree line. Then she climbed down from the ridge and walked to the cabin. Torben was in the doorway. You said you left the south trail open on purpose, he said. Always leave one way out, Varra said. A trapped man fights. A man with an exit uses it. He looked at her for a long time. Then he went inside. She followed. If an orc woman defending a mine from a ridge with 2 blocked trails and 1 clear voice just changed the way you think about strength, then you already know this story. Subscribe, like. We're almost at the end. Spring came the way it always came to that country. Not gently, but in arguments. Warm days followed by freezing nights. The snowpack softening and refreezing until the balance tipped and the melt became permanent. They rode down to Grey Hollow on a Tuesday in late March. Vera noted the day without saying anything. She had started marking Tuesdays differently. The town received them the way towns receive things they do not know how to categorize. Word had come down through the winter, fragments carried by traders and travelers. The mountain miner was in a collapse. Someone was up there with him. Craig's survey team had come back without equipment and with a silence about what had happened on the ridge. The pieces existed. Nobody had assembled them. The complete picture was Varra riding into town beside Torben, with ore samples in their saddlebags and documentation in his coat and an expression on her face that several people would describe afterward in terms they could not quite articulate. Not arrogance, not triumph. Something quieter than either. The guild office was their first stop. The registrar, a flat-faced man named Hollis, received them with the weariness of someone who had been hearing Cragg's name in conversations about this ridge for too long. Torben laid the claim documentation on the desk. Varra laid the ore samples and the survey maps beside it. And then she laid one more thing, a rubbing she had made of the orc mining marks from the east gallery wall. What is this? Hollis asked. Evidence that this mine was worked by orc clans 200 years before any human claim was filed, Varra said. The marks are Deep Stone clan script, 3rd gallery notation, dated by mineral deposit analysis to at least 2 centuries before current settlement. Hollis looked at the rubbing. He looked at Varra. He looked at Torben. This changes the legal context, Hollis said slowly. If the orc claim predates, it predates everything, Varra said. Every filing, every survey, every piece of paper Cragg has ever produced. This mine belonged to my people before the territory system existed. The hearing took 2 days. Cragg arrived with lawyers. Vera sat through the procedural machinery with the patience of a woman who had survived 9 days alone in a storm, and 3 days sealed in a collapsing gallery, and was not going to be undone by paperwork. She testified once, precisely, factually, without decoration. The ruling came on the second afternoon. The original homestead claim was confirmed. Craig's backdated filing was declared fraudulent. The matter of Derek's death was referred to a territorial marshal for separate investigation. The guildmaster added that himself, looking at Craig as he said it. Craig left Grey Hollow the following morning. Walter Lund came to see Vera on the third day. She was outside the guild office reviewing the finalized partnership documents when she heard footsteps and looked up. Lund stood in front of her with his hat in his hands, the same hat he had been holding 8 months ago in Bellamy's barn when he told her that her father's debts made her a liability. He looked different, thinner. The confident, square-jawed farmer she remembered had been replaced by a man whose operation had clearly not survived the winter. "Well, Miss Vara," he said. "Mrs. Vara," she corrected, not unkindly, just accurately. Lund's jaw worked. He looked at his boots, looked at his hat, looked at the guild office behind her. "I heard you're expanding the mine operation," he said. "Hiring crew for the summer season." "We are. I've got experience with pickwork. Spent 2 years in the Greystone mine before I took up farming. He stopped. The sentence was costing him something visible. "I'm looking for work." Vera looked at this man, the first of the 7, the one who had walked away from her with an apology that was almost sincere, and a hat that was put back on as he left. She looked at him and felt nothing that resembled revenge. No satisfaction, no vindication, no desire to make him feel what she had felt in that barn. She felt something more useful than any of those things. She felt clear. "The work is hard," she said. "The mountain doesn't care about your farming experience. You'll start at the bottom, and you'll take direction from me." He looked up. She could see him processing it. The orc woman he had rejected was now offering him employment. The person he had evaluated and found wanting was now the person who would evaluate him. "From you," he said. "Not a question." "A confirmation." "From me," Vera said. "I run the crew. Torben runs the deep galleries. If you have a problem taking direction from an orc woman, say so now and save us both the time." Lund stood there for a long moment. Then he put his hat on. "When do I start?" he said. "Tomorrow, 4th bell. Don't be late." He nodded. He turned. He walked 3 steps, then stopped and turned back. "At the gathering," he said. What I said about your father's debts, I remember what you said. It was the biggest mistake I ever made." Vara looked at him. "No," she said. "It was the biggest mistake you made that night. The biggest mistake you ever made was the reason you're standing here asking me for work instead of running your farm." He flinched, but he did not argue, because there was nothing to argue with. "4th bell," Vera repeated. He left. The partnership was filed formally that afternoon. The documents read, "Vara and Torben, North Ridge Mining Operation." Her name first. Orc name first on a mining claim in a territory that had never registered an orc name on anything. The guild registrar wrote it without comment, which was its own kind of recognition. The absence of objection from a system that had been built to object to exactly this. They rode back to the mountain. 2 days later, the trail was clear, the passes open, the air warm enough that Vera could feel the season turning. Spring in this country was not gentle, but it was forward-looking. It pointed at something, instead of holding against something. They reached the cabin in the late afternoon. The light was warm and angled, and it made the cabin and the mine entrance and the whole hollow look like what it was. A place 2 people had held through a winter that had tried to take everything from them and had failed. Vara dismounted. She stood in front of the mine entrance and looked at the timber framing and the dark opening in the mountain above it. "You know something?" she said. Torben was unsaddling the horses. He glanced at her. "Probably. 7 men stood in that barn and looked at me and decided I wasn't worth the trouble. 7. She turned to face him. "And you walked in covered in rock dust and chose me in 5 minutes." 3 minutes, he said. The other 2 were walking across the room. She almost smiled. Not quite, but close. closer than she had been to smile in a very long time. I wasn't worth anything to them, she said. And now one of them works for me. You were always worth it, Torben said. He said it flat, factual, the way he said most things. A statement about the world rather than a compliment. They just didn't know what they were looking at. And you did? I knew what I needed. He set the saddle on the rail and looked at her across the yard. I needed someone who wouldn't break. Not someone pretty or polished or any of the things those men were shopping for. Someone who would look at a mountain and not flinch. He paused. You didn't flinch. Vara looked at the mine entrance, at the mountain above it, at the cabin where she had spent 9 days alone keeping everything alive, at the ridge where she had held a rifle and told 9 armed men to leave. My people mined this mountain 200 years ago, she said, and then the world pushed them out. And now I'm here, and the mine has my name on it. She looked at her hands, scarred, bruised, rock-dusted, the hands of a woman who had swung a pick and dug through a collapse and sharpened chisels, and set traps and held a mountain against everyone who tried to take it. 7 men rejected me, she said. The mountain didn't. She turned and walked toward the mine entrance, and stopped at the threshold and put her hand flat against the timber framing, the wood that Derek had cut and Torben had maintained, and that now bore, carved into the lintel in letters she had chiseled herself the day before they rode to the valley. The name that would be on every map and every document and every piece of ore that came out of this mountain from now until the stone ran dry. Vara. Behind her, Torben stood in the yard and watched her and did not say anything, because the moment did not need words, it needed what it had. An orc woman standing at the entrance of a mine that had been her people's before it was anyone's, with her name above the door and her partner behind her, and the mountain, vast and indifferent and permanent, holding all of it the way mountains hold everything, without opinion, without judgment, without caring who you were or where you came from, or how many people had told you that you were not enough. The mountain only cared about one thing. Could you hold it? Vara could. She always could. The world just needed a little longer to find out.